check this out. Training to failure can definitely have some benefits. You got to be smart about it. Here's one tip. If you're going to do some sets to failure, make them high rep sets. One of the things that makes up failure training is low volume, right? The intensity is super high, so you're doing less sets. But low rep failure training doesn't seem to produce enough muscle stress to give you the results you're looking for. So if you're going to train to failure, obviously the volume's low, but try to pick a weight where you fail at 12 to 15 reps, or maybe even as high as 20 reps. You'll find that you get better results that way.
Now, is your opinion to do that more often than you would do heavy weight failure? Is that what or always, or?
It brings the risk factor down a bit, right?
That's another one, yeah. So there's a few benefits to this. So there is this kind of cumulative stress that you get when you do multiple sets, right? This is why volume has been closely connected to muscle growth. Well, failure training is really low volume by nature. The idea is to do a set to failure, to muscular failure, so super high intensity, but then because it's so intense, you have to do less volume. And so that's like the selling point, right? And when it's novel, it does seem to produce some gains in a lot of people, especially if you're advanced. But the challenge is if you're doing a set to failure with like 5 reps, it's not enough muscular fatigue to produce the desired result. But if you do a set to failure at 15, now you're still getting some of that cumulative effect plus the intensity. And then what Justin said, I think is real important. Going to failure at 5 reps, the risk is high for injury, right? Your form can go out the window, whatever. When it's a set to 15, you can really make sure that your form is perfect. And I would say that's probably the most important factor to consider when you train to failure is technique, because your technique has to be perfect. Otherwise, it's a very risky form of training.
I would say this is very, bodybuilder-esque. That's
totally
very much so. I think their philosophy. In fact, almost to a fault, I'd say most of my bodybuilder friends rarely train to failure, especially in singles, doubles, triples, or even 5x5. They rarely even run a 5x5 routine, and so the bodybuilding community tends to really lean hard into this tip.
There's some truth there, right? Because if you look at like the strength athletes, like powerlifters who do train in low reps, they rarely train to failure. They don't train to failure unless they're really testing out what their PR is or their max is. But they rarely ever like max out as part of their training protocol. Now, bodybuilders obviously use failure much more often, but they do the higher reps. Yeah. They definitely do that. Now, I've played with this quite a bit, and it's a big difference. Like if I do a set of failure to 7 reps, it's not the same as 15 reps. It's almost like I get the CNS fatigue, but I don't get the muscle stimulating effects. Now, what's cool too is studies that compare higher reps to lower reps. If the sets are taken to failure, the higher reps build just as much or if not more muscle. So it's just one of those things, like if you want to try utilizing failure training, by the way, there's more that goes to this because there's a lot of factors you want to consider and you want to be really smart. I think training to failure requires more precise programming than other methodologies because it's so high intense. But this is one thing to consider. Like if you're gonna do it, keep the reps high, and then you'll see more benefit than if you go, really low. I don't know if you guys experimented with this yourselves.
Well, yeah, I definitely think the fatigue factor is way different when you go in the high reps versus like the low reps. So even so, like you get that muscular fatigue, like the endurance fatigue, but when you go to failure in the low rep range, it's almost like your whole body shuts down. It's really hard to control at that point. So that's why I think that the risk factor is definitely higher in that direction.
I think it really matters on who we're talking to. I feel like failure training is abused or overused in the fitness fanatic. It's underutilized in the
casual,
the casual lifter, novice, someone who's just getting started in the gym. They tend not to train to failure or push themselves as often, and probably need to hear the advice that, hey, you got more. We could probably put more on the bar, or we could, try harder or whatever. But with your clients or with your people that are training, consistently for years and years, at least I fell in this trap.
Yeah, they just hit that button too often.
Yeah, I used to train to almost every exercise I did, and in the gym consistently, I would end up training at least one set, if not every set, to failure. And I think that was a big mistake and probably stalled a lot of my progress had I not understood.
A lot of young lifters make that mistake. Me included in that. And it's just like, you just want to test yourself constantly. And I do think that it's important to test yourself and your abilities and your strength and your technique and kind of put it on display, but very less frequent than most people would think.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you burn out easily. The volume required, or not just required, the volume of failure training to make it effective has got to be low. So if I'm going to do normally 12 sets for a body part, and if I go to failure training, I'm doing like 2 or 3 failure sets. So it's like way less volume. I'm going to use an analogy. I hope this works. So if you guys, if it sucks, you guys let me know. But you know what this reminds me of? It's like a car performance and nitrous, right? Nitrous is a real fast, easy way to get like 20, 30 horsepower.
Right.
But you got to
blow your engine too.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be so precise with how you use it that if you use it wrong, you're done. Your engine's done. Failure training can be super effective, but your programming has to be much more precise. You get away with way less when you train to failure. So if you're going to use it, like you got to be really smart, really precise with it. Otherwise, you blow your engine.
I think that analogy is really good because one of the problems with failure training is the temptation to want to do it because you definitely feel or see a difference, right? You do your first, few times of failure training and you're like, oh, wow, the next time you get back to that exercise, I feel stronger. Or wow, back when you used to measure your success of your workout by your soreness, you'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sore. And so you become addicted to the speed that you get, from the nitrous. And so I think it's a great analogy. And anybody who's ever been in a car or used nitrous before, you got to be very careful on how much you use that because the engine isn't built to handle that much all the time. And so the temptation to want to use it all the time is there because you definitely feel a difference when you blast it. But I think it's a great analogy.
Or is the tires, the undercarriage, everything else supporting it. So it's like you want to go full blast, it affects the entire chain.
Yeah. No, I'm glad that analogy worked. I was thinking of a sports analogy. I said I'm safer if I go with car performance.